heard about virtual reality and kinda have a vague idea of what Metaverse is. And if you don't worry. In this series of videos, I'll take you on a journey exploring technologies, trends, and science fiction stories that led to the emergence of the idea of Metaverse. We'll start from the genesis of digital worlds in science fiction, and we'll catch up to the cutting-edge technology of tomorrow. All that to uncover the fascinating story of Metaverse. So sit tight and enjoy the show. Everything in human history started from a simple curiosity. In the first episode of this series, I'll take you down the rabbit hole of science fiction to find out what started the curiosity over the concept of virtual reality and eventually Metaverse. When was the first time that someone thought, hey, what if we put on a pair of glasses and instead of seeing all this, we see some other stuff? And it's difficult to pinpoint the exact origin of the idea, but the one that started it all. And no, it's not Snow Crash. Sorry to burst your bubble, but don't worry, we'll get there.
You can't handle the truth!
All is dream, all is illusion. I am your vision, as you are mine. Well, that wasn't me, that was from a book. Actually, the earliest example of the concept of virtual reality that I could find is in this book. The 1935 Pygmalions of Spectacles by Stanley G.W. is a story about a guy that builds a pair of glasses that allows its user to experience a fully immersive virtual reality world. And yes, we're talking 1935. This was before the Second World War.
Monty, it's 1935!
The novel was way ahead of its time. I mean, this is decades before earliest computer graphics. Monitors didn't even exist back then, and tube TVs were considered cutting-edge technology, and they look like this.
This TV is a classic.
I think that the significance of this novel was to manifest something out of the realm of pure impossibility for its time and pave the way for future science fiction writers, as we'll see later in this video. I mean, it rocked the genre and made everyone realize that there are no limits when it comes to imagination, right? So here comes the 40s, and unfortunately we don't see any significant contributions to the science fiction genre. This was largely due to the outbreak of Second World War and the destructive obsession that humanity had with going apeshit over bombing each other. I guess it's difficult to focus on the imaginative realm of science fiction when the world is in a state of turmoil and destruction. I'm not gonna go through every single story that influenced the invention of virtual reality and augmented reality in the 20th century, but I cannot in good conscience ignore The City and Stars by the famous Arthur C. Clarke. Yeah, this guy. I cannot believe how he came up with all that stuff back in the 50s. I mean, advanced robots, ancient supercomputers, and even a sentient spaceship.
I don't believe you.
So the story is set, check this, 1 billion years into future, in a city called Diaspar, where everything is managed and controlled by a literally godlike computer called the Central Machine. Now, this all-knowing machine has access to every single piece of information that has ever existed. Like everything on a bagel. Rings a bell?
Everything on a bagel?
So this machine predicts and controls the future. At the same time, humans living in Diaspar are living in a world of virtual reality, and they can experience anything they desire through advanced technology. Don't worry, I'm not gonna spoil the whole book for you, but it's an amazing read, so you might want to put it on your list. If we put the whole Greek philosophy thing aside for a second, in my opinion, The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke is one of the first hints to the modern concept of metaverse, and also some of the first hints to intelligent machines and artificial general intelligence are in this book. Okay, this is the 60s, folks, and we have Beatles, go-go boots, and lava lamps. What else? Oh, I know. Another crazy story about computer-generated virtual cities.
In cheap science fiction?
Cheap science fiction?
Simulacron 3 was published in 1964, and it was about a well-designed computer program initially designed for market research. But when the test subjects are plugged in, the simulation is so convincing that they have no idea they are inside a computer program.
Are you a simulation? Huh?
But arguably, the most influential novel about virtual worlds in the 60s was this one, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's a science fiction novel by Philip K. Dick and published in 1968. This story takes place in a post-apocalyptic future where Earth has been devastated by a global war and most animal species have become extinct. The main character is a bounty hunter on a mission to track down and retire rogue androids that escaped from off-world colonies and illegally entered Earth. As he delves deeper into his mission, he begins to question his own humanity and the morality of his actions. The novel explores themes such as empathy, the nature of consciousness, and the definition of what it means to be human. This idea was later adopted in the 1982 movie Blade Runner, directed by the great Ridley Scott. And if you haven't watched the original Blade Runner, you should put it on your watch list. It's one of the greatest movies of all time.
I'm Deckard, Blade Runner, 26354.
So we looked into a few influential works about the concept of virtual worlds so far, and each of them in their own way contributed to the big picture. That's the reason I chose to talk about science fiction in the first episode of this series, because I think science fiction opens a window to a future timeline and makes predictions about where the projection of technology and its cultural impacts is taking us. And if you think about it, proper science fiction is really the prophecy of the modern era. And with that, let's go see what happened in the 70s. Oh boy, making this episode is taking longer than I thought, but it's a fun process, I love it. And I get to talk about stuff that I'm really curious about, and there's more of it coming, so keep watching.
You look different somehow.
In my opinion, the only novel in the 1970s that had critical influence on virtual reality and cybernetic worlds was The Shockwave Rider by John Brunner, which came out in 1975, and like the other precedents that we just talked about, this one is also about a future where people use virtual reality to escape the problems of the real world. But this one also talks about the power of information networks and dangers of such technology in their own hands. The main setting of the novel is a future society where computers control daily life, kind of like what it is today. And the people who possess the ability to manipulate networks and disrupt the established systems become extremely dangerous and powerful. Today, we call these people hackers.
Russian hackers again?
Brunner envisioned a world where information is power, which is very true if you think about it for a second. And controlling or manipulating that information becomes a means of influence and control.
Information is power, so...
It talks about issues such as government surveillance, information control, hacking, and the ethics of all that. It also raises questions about personal privacy in a world of surveillance and the right to access information. So the tension becomes between the desire for an open and transparent society versus the need for individual privacy and autonomy. The idea of manipulating information flows and social systems for specific purposes is something that he explores in the novel. In other words, we're talking about good old-fashioned social engineering, where individuals or groups influence society's behavior and beliefs through calculated manipulation of networks. Does that ring a bell for you? Well, this is exactly what the social media SEOs are doing right now. I'm gonna do another whole episode about search engine optimization in social media and the social engineering projects that work in tandem with them, but that's probably for another time. This book is also considered to be a precursor to the cyberpunk genre, which, as we'll see later in this video, emerges in the 80s, and that's when things finally started getting interesting. The 1980s were revolutionary, mainly because of the two concepts that emerged in the 80s, cyberpunk and metaverse. But first, let's talk about Johnny Mnemonic. No, not the 1995 film, which was kind of cool for its time. I mean, talk about crappy CGI, but come on, it was Keanu Reeves. I like that. Johnny Mnemonic is a science fiction short story by American-Canadian writer William Gibson, this guy. And it was published in Omni magazine in '81. The core concept of this story is about people that smuggle sensitive information in their brains for some shady clients, like our friend Johnny here. When Gibson introduced the idea of individuals serving as data carriers, it raised the question of data ownership and the problems associated with the exchange of data in a hyper-connected world. A concept that we can later align with the exchange of information and virtual goods within metaverse-like environments. So if you think about it from an evolutionary perspective, the exploration of these highly connected digital spaces and the fusion of human consciousness and virtual reality is a concept that would eventually evolve into metaverse. And that is what makes Johnny Mnemonic by William Gibson so iconic. The fact that it laid the conceptual groundwork for discussion around metaverse by envisioning individuals as access portals to digital highways and virtual worlds. And now, it's time for Tron.
The computer, an extension of the human intellect. The NCOM 511, center of the most calculating intelligence on Earth.
The 1982 Tron was the first film ever to visually represent a digital world inside a computer, successfully, and with an iconic visual style. I mean, earlier literature talked about what visualization of a digital space would look like, or at least tried, but Tron actually did it. For the first time, it presented a magical immersive virtual reality environment. The characters interacted with each other and did all kinds of challenges and played games and all. What makes the original Tron special is that it introduced the concept of individuals existing as sentient agents inside a digital space. This is what was later called Metaverse. Tron conceptually proved the idea that human consciousness could be transported and exist within a computer-generated network. In 1983, and 1 year after Tron was premiered, the term cyberpunk was coined by Bruce Bethke in his short story titled Cyberpunk. The identity of cyberpunk is mixed with visuals and stories of AI and virtual reality and the fusion of human and machine. And the setting is often a dystopian future that technology empowers and sometimes oppresses humanity. And arguably the most influential early example of cyberpunk is this, Neuromancer by, again, William Gibson. It was published in '84, 3 years after Johnny Mnemonic. Neuromancer is arguably the godfather of cyberpunk fiction, and one of the first books to talk about the intersection of artificial intelligence and human nature. And it's also the birthplace of the concept of cyberspace, which is the precursor to Metaverse. And all of that aside, Gibson has a distinctive writing style. His writing rendered a vivid imagery and brought a unique voice to science fiction. His use of language and neologisms created a bold and immersive ambiance in the novel that heavily influenced the way futuristic themes would be brought to life in science fiction and movies from this point.
You guys are cyberpunks, aren't you?
Okay, even though this one doesn't directly deal with virtual reality or metaverse, but I can't help but paying tribute to Akira, which was released in 1988 in Japan. Akira was the anime that introduced the whole cyberpunk culture to the West, especially to the United States. The film is set in a dystopian, post-apocalyptic Neo-Tokyo, and it introduced anime to a global audience, especially in the West and the United States. From this point, everybody was suddenly interested in Japanese animation, and everyone quickly realized that it is a legitimate and respected art form. So we looked at the 20th century and we saw the emergence of all this body of literature from mostly American writers about the idea of virtual reality worlds, but the concept of metaverse itself is more of a contemporary one. And many would argue that it was the Japanese manga that started the postmodern definition of what immersive virtual reality is and what metaverse spaces are going to eventually look like. Now we have this guy called Masamune Shirow, who's a brilliant Japanese manga artist, and right after the success of Akira, he picked up where William Gibson left off and came up with probably one of the best science fiction stories ever. You guessed it right, the legendary Ghost in the Shell. Between 1989 to 1997, he published 4 manga series. The original Ghost in the Shell, 1.5 Human Error Processor, 1.6 The Human Algorithm, and Ghost in the Shell 2, which came out in 1997. And with that, it was finally time for the 90s. The 90s saw an explosion of science fiction movies, but for the sake of your patience and my sanity, we're not going to go through all of them. This was a time of significant technological advancement and cultural change, and science fiction became an increasingly popular way to explore these issues and reflect on a rapidly evolving world. It saw the rise of TV shows like The X-Files and Star Trek, as well as the video games as a powerful medium for science fiction storytelling. But let's just focus on Ghost in the Shell for now, because it's just such an special one. In 1995, an adaptation of the manga series came out. It was an adult animated neo-noir cyberpunk thriller film. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful. Like the manga series, the film was also an investigation into the blurring boundaries between human and machine. The film explores a future where individuals can connect their consciousness to networks, creating a virtual existence and questioning the nature of identity and self in the digital realm. And this is the first time that we see the popularization of transhumanist ideas in pop culture. Concepts such as the integration of technology into human body and potential for digital consciousness is a recurring theme in Ghost in the Shell. These ideas align with the discussions around transhumanism and its intersection with the cybernetic life forms, where individuals can enhance their abilities and transcend their physical limitations in virtual spaces. What made this film astonishing, in my opinion, is the fact that it's showing us the first glimpse into what's going to happen when the line between the man and the machine becomes blurred. It's also raising the question of who has the agency, the man or the machine, and what is true intelligence? This magnitude of exploration of cyberspace and the merging of human and virtual realities was strongly resonating with the concept that was later called Metaverse. For those of you who haven't watched the original 1995 anime, I highly recommend that you watch it. It's one of the best films ever made in the history of cinema, and hands down, the best anime ever. Ghost in a Shell was way ahead of its time, and it has a stylish artistic presence that few films managed to measure up to ever since. About at the same time, and a couple years later after the first Ghost in a Shell manga came out, the American writer Neil Stephenson came up with a post-cyberpunk novel in 1992. You guessed it right again, Snow Crash. Now, what we established so far is that the concept of virtual reality worlds existed before Stevenson, but Snow Crash is the first time ever that we hear the word metaverse. Stevenson predicted that in future, there will be this massive virtual reality experience like a very large open world video game, but also limited to analogs of reality like height, density, volume, and such. And users would use that virtual reality experience to interact, explore, and conduct business instead of walking around in the real world. Because in a Snow Crash, like any other good cyberpunk story, the real world is turned into a ruin. A Snow Crash is a critical examination of capitalism, technology, and societal structures. It questions corporate power, information control, and the influence of media on societies. And that is why Snow Crash is still such a big deal, because it talks about the potential impacts of metaverse on governance models, social structures, and macroeconomy. And on top of that, Stevenson uses linguistics in a very creative way in the novel, like the Sumerian language virus, which is a program that has the ability to hack and infect the minds of users inside Metaverse. This idea of language as a programming tool in Metaverse is very interesting because it's really talking about bringing the philosophy of linguistics to the conversation on how the intersection of language and culture would shape virtual experiences. There's nothing really left to be said about Matrix, aside from the fact that it is one of the greatest movies of all time. When it came out in 1999, there was nothing like it and still isn't. Matrix changed everything. It redefined the action genre. Storytelling was unreal. A different dystopian future that no one had seen before. And all that, sentient agents, enslaved humanity, super advanced AI, and the struggle for survival. All of that, in my opinion, is ironically the perfect evil side of Metaverse, something that we might probably want to avoid. And that was it. Matrix did it. It showed us what a fully immersive simulation would look like. Even though in a very dark and dystopian fashion, but still, Matrix was it. It was a clear vision of a fully immersive, digitally constructed reality. And since Matrix, there hasn't really been anything to elevate our perception of Metaverse, at least not from a conceptual point of view, if you ask me. And yes, I saw Ready Player One, and no, I didn't like it. I mean, come on, we had almost an entire century of science fiction literature that so profoundly elaborated the principles of virtual reality, and films like Ghost in a Shell asking fundamental questions about the emergence of consciousness, and then there's Matrix elevating cinema to a whole different level, and then there's Ready Player One, Hollywooding the crap out of it with unrealistic CGI and cheesy cliches. I mean, come on, we can do better than that. Today, the virtual reality technology has almost caught up with the visionary imagination of Weinbaum in Pygmalion's spectacles with modern VR headsets. But we still have a long way to go to catch up to Arthur C. Clarke, Philip K. Dick, William Gibson, and Masamune Shirow. The possibilities are endless. Virtual reality will be a portal to infinite possibilities. And I believe that our future will not be a dark dystopian cyberpunk nightmare like Matrix, but a beautiful and progressive future, both culturally and technologically. This is just the beginning of our journey. I plan an entire series of episodes on YouTube dedicated to exploring technology, art, cinema, and architecture. This video is not sponsored, but if you like to see more of these, the best way for you to support me is to subscribe, hit the bell, like and share this video with your friends, and definitely check out and follow my Instagram where I'm posting a lot of cool stuff on a daily basis, by the way. My website, Twitter, and Patreon, link to all that in the description below. And please leave a comment, let me know what you think, or if you have any questions or feedback. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.